Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Hi, Anna. I just wanted to add, I mentioned you to my people at Freedom for Youth, and they're so excited that I'm working with you. Um, I might have to switch off and join again with my phone because I have to do some deliveries for them in a bit. I don't want to miss when what's it called? The post office closes. So just letting you know.
Yeah, no worries. And I wanted to invite you to our staff meeting for One Step a la Vez on Monday at 1 o'clock, as well as Marlene. I think you're both working with us, right? So everyone wants to meet you and hear kind of what you're interested in contributing. So yeah, Monday at 1, and I'll send you the Zoom link.
Sounds great.
Thank you. All right, we are still missing a couple folks. Let's give it until 2:03 and then we'll get started. There's Taylor. Okay. Could you just join us from 1:45 to 2?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, then I'll just schedule you all to kind of introduce yourselves at 1:45. That way you both can be on. Or should I say 1:50 just to give you a few minutes to transition from your exam to the meeting?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay. Thank you for giving me the heads up. All right, it's 2:03. Let's start by checking in. And just to switch it up, I'm going to give you an icebreaker. What 3 things would you take to a deserted island?
Any 3 things?
Yeah, any 3 things. And whoever wants to start, go for it.
I can go. Sorry, I'm on my phone, so I can't figure out my video. I would take a knife, a bowl, and an emergency blanket. I've worked for adventure programs, so I've actually been asked this question a lot of times, but the number of items is always different.
Okay, knife, a bowl, and what was the third thing?
An emergency blanket, like one of those. They're really little, and it's like it looks like tinfoil when you're wearing it, but it like keeps you really warm and it's really thin.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Allison. What do you want to popcorn it to?
I will popcorn Sicily.
Okay, I would take one of those straws that can like filter water from any source. I think like a really good book to keep me entertained, and then probably a first aid kit. I'll popcorn it to Rachel.
Yeah, I'm not really a survivalist, so I have no idea. I watch there's a show Alone on Netflix where it's like a bunch of people surviving. The person that survives the longest wins like $1 million, but they're completely alone, so it's kind of like a mental game. I would say like rope, one of the filter straws, and maybe like fishing hooks. And I'll popcorn it to Martha.
Okay. I would take a rope like Rachel, one of those metal canisters to put water in, and a knife. And then I'll popcorn it to Taylor.
I'd probably go with an axe, like a tarp thing to make shelter with, and also water filtration system. Ilse, do you want to go next?
Yes, I didn't hear the question, but I'm assuming it's what three things we would bring to a desert island kind of thing. Um, and like I need to preface this with like I don't think that I would survive in that kind of situation, but let's just pretend. So I think I would bring a lighter, um, some kind of like tent, and also like water filtration. Oh, and then I'll popcorn it to, I don't know who hasn't gone, but Marlene, if you want to type your answers.
The Excel one. No, I have not. Say more while Marlene's getting back on. It's so weird. Is this on Netflix or what is it on?
It's on Hulu. It's called Naked and Afraid XL. So instead of it being one female, one male, it's like groups of tribes and they have to meet each other and then go to the end of the island. It's so weird.
And they're naked?
Yeah, they're all naked. And they each get one item to bring.
That's so crazy. Man, the things they'll do to get ratings. So let's see if Marlene's back. Okay, Marlene, you're back. So yeah, what are the three things that you would take to a deserted island?
I'd probably take a knife and then something to keep me warm like a blanket. And I think Cicely was the one that said that a first aid kit. And kind of talking back to what Martha was saying about Naked and Afraid, I've seen that show too, and they also show I think they stay there for like a month, I'm not really sure, but at the end they show like how much weight they've lost and all the different skills that they've learned, and they literally do all that for money. And it shows like how they're in the forest and it gets like really cold and stuff, and they get like blisters and things like that. So it's really interesting but also super weird.
Because it kind of connects back to the show, right? Like what people will do for money, what capitalism gets people to do for money. So on that note, those of you who ordered the Midwest Academy books, you should have gotten them by now because I know I got mine. The rest of you, I hope you got in touch with Kaylee to get your own. And yeah, really excited for Charmaine to speak today. She is going to be talking to you all about abolition. Hopefully you did the readings, and I did provide an extra credit assignment there in case you wanted to do some additional readings, because she gave me a whole lot of stuff for you all to read, and I'm like, okay, I know this is kind of a lot, so it's not all mandatory, but if you would like to do some of that extra reading, I know it is a really fascinating topic that is very timely. You can write a reflection journal on that, and I'll definitely give you extra credit for that. I'm also going to be meeting with, well, I had an initial meeting with Isabela Restrepo. She works at the MCC to kind of figure out some more events at the MCC that you all can plug into and participate in and hopefully get extra credit for. But I just wanted to thank you all again for your reflection papers. It's such a treat for me to be able to read them and see what you're learning from everything. And so I wanted to just kind of go into some of the things that you all mentioned in your reflection papers. And we're not, I know we're missing a couple of folks. I know at least one of them, it was because of vaccine side effects from the second dose. And I am very aware of that because I just had my second dose on Wednesday and I was feeling pretty terrible. Just barely now getting out of it created like this whole brain fog where I couldn't really think straight. And I would like try to work, but yeah, my thoughts just weren't connecting. Plus I started getting fever and chills, but the good side is it does subside. So in case you're worried about it, it does start going away. I'm probably in like the 36th hour of it, and it's finally like leaving my body. All the side effects. So anyway, just wanted to give a plug for a vaccine. You get your second dose, yeah, before one of our classes next month. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I mean, a little bit of it isn't immediate, but it mostly comes after a while. Like at first I started feeling a tiny bit of nausea, but not too bad. and then suddenly it just starts getting pretty bad. But the worst part of it, I would say, only lasts about 10 hours. That does sound like a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, you'll be more protected. So, oh, I'm so glad you felt fine, Allison. Yeah, it affects people different ways too. So it's possible you might not feel anything. I don't know what predicts whether you're gonna feel anything or not, but I've also talked to other people. Like my mom said, with the first and the second shot, nothing happened to her at all. Oh, for you, it was the day after. Yeah, feverish. Um, I wanted to keep sleeping. I just had too much to do. So I kept snapping myself out of it. But anyway, all that to say is I understand why we have a couple of absences today, but I still wanted to kind of share some quotes from what people talked about. So one with Aaliyah, who we're missing right now, is we may have to employ tactics and work with people who we might not fully trust in order to accomplish something. But we should never forget that our commitment and our duty is to ourselves, the community we belong to and fight for. And so that's why I think it's so good for you all to have this book, because it teaches you, right, all the tricks that people will try to use against you. And even though, unfortunately, these people, we would like to be able to trust them, but a lot of times you can't. So just reminding everyone like what your purpose is, and sticking true to that purpose is what will help keep you all together, you and your team that are fighting for whatever the issue may be. Taylor mentioned in relation to the Red Deal that she recently read Braiding Sweetgrass, and I am reading that book too. It is so good, which is by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and it really imparted an understanding to her of how important it is to deliberately change our relationship with the land and our treatment of it, to treat it as something deeply worthy of respect. And I feel like that is such an important point, because when we talk about climate change, I feel like we always go straight to the whole thing of like, oh, we won't exist anymore, right? And like doing it because we have to, like changing because we have to, but forgetting that the reason why we're getting to this point of changing because we have to is because our relationship with the earth has been so out of whack for so long, and so reminding us that yes, that is true, that we do have to change. If not, we won't be here anymore. And also all of these ways that we have been relating to each other and the earth are messed up, so we need to rethink all of that. Marlene mentioned that while regarding Ralph's talk, while their efforts didn't result in the shutdown of the school, they crossed personal lines by engaging in a risky activity, all for the common good. So coming back to that question of risk, right? And knowing that sometimes what you're fighting for, it's not going to be achievable within like the next 2 or 3 years, but that you're moving the needle and that you're helping build a movement that will hopefully close, whether it be the School of the Americas or stop the prison industrial complex, whatever it is, right? We're pushing the movement forward to get us closer to where we need to be. Cicely mentioned there is a lot of merit in not getting the media involved, especially when it may impact the target's response to an organization's demands. And I thought that was really interesting that you got that point, because so often we're so like wrapped up in getting media to show up to things, right? And having those cool gimmicks. And a lot of times it is helpful. But can you say more, Cicely, about those situations? Oh, we're missing. Why did I think Cicely was here? Oh, yeah, you are. You're right there. And wearing the pink. Yeah, can you say more about that in situations where you might not want the media?
Yeah, the book was talking about like if the media could, like if someone was up for re-election or something and it could like hurt their chances or hurt their relationship with the organization or the people you're trying to get your demands met with, then it might not be useful. And it could be a fallback option, but you don't want to like lose their respect right away.
And it could also be a bartering tool, right? Because they don't want the negative media attention. It'll be like, okay, well, we'll keep this, not public if you go along with these demands. But, unfortunately, we are going to have to go there if you don't move forward with, whatever the issue may be.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
That's a good threat almost.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to threaten them, otherwise they don't change. And I wanted to mention Ari's point, and she is one of the folks that I said is out because of the side effects. So she talked about how an entirely new world must be built, right? And we have mentioned this before in the class, that capitalism and colonialism thrive and profit off racism and sexism as well, having the ability to exploit those who society values less. And so this was in direct relationship to the post-capitalism conference and the Red Deal, right? And transforming into a caretaking economy. So can folks kind of reflect on what a caretaking economy looks like for you? What kind of jobs would be paid more?
Just like jobs that actually help people instead of profit. In one of my other classes, we were talking about privatization and capitalism, and we were talking about how even like basic needs like water are starting to get privatized. And so in like a more community approach, those things, obviously you wouldn't even have to pay for them because they're basic needs that would be provided.
So that's one very key thing, right? Stopping water privatization. Water is not something that should be owned. How about prisons, right? There's privately owned prisons right now that have very little accountability. And not that prisons are good to have at all, but if they are going to exist, privatization doesn't help them be any better. Especially with the immigrant detention centers that we've seen, they've been absolutely horrific. The conditions that they make people live in every day, right? What else? Keep it coming.
Something I'm really like trying to get into is like free mental health care and free crisis care. And like every place that I work with is, volunteer based, but like just like imagining if there was funding behind that, there could be so many people that could like, de-escalate situations or like actually help someone without any threat of, punishment or violence.
So true, so key. And let's welcome Aaliyah. Thanks for joining us. We were just talking about everyone's reflection paper, and I quoted you already, but thank you so much for what you submitted.
I'm really sorry I'm late. I had an interview at the Daily Nexus and it ran long, and so I didn't want to like leave, but I'm sorry.
It's okay. How are they doing these days? Are they better than they were back when I was there? They used to suck.
Yeah. I have a little bit of personal beef with the Nexus. I don't love them. But they were doing like a term in review for my EVPSA term, so I kind of had to do it. The reporter that I interviewed with was super cool, but she's a first year, so she didn't know a lot of the Nexus's history. But yeah, I don't love them. I think maybe they're a little bit better than I don't really know.
Yeah. All right. We were just talking about caretaking economies and what that looks like, right? So we mentioned how jobs that help people would get paid better. There would not be privatization of things like water and prisons. There would be free mental health care. What else can we envision?
Thinking like free community-based childcare too.
Love that. So necessary.
I feel like in general, just like not looking at people from a deficit perspective, but more like the potential and like what they can bring. But I mean, that could go into like so many different aspects, like in education, not constantly labeling students as like at risk or like problematic students, but like trying to figure out what they can bring to the classroom and how you can support them to find that potential. And then even in like the prison system, like when people come out of prisons, they're just looked at from such a deficit, and it like follows them through jobs. And so like, I mean, I would just say remove the prison system, but if that's not the answer, then like at least finding ways to actually support people so that they're not, even when they're outside the walls of a prison, they're not like still trapped within the system.
Right, because when they're in prison, supposedly the number of years that they're in there, that's their payment of their debt, right? But then they still have to pay again once they get out when they're looking for jobs, exactly what you said. So how many times are we going to make people pay for their mistakes? How do we help them be better in a nurturing, loving way, right? Where does the love enter the equation?
I think it's also like ideally in a caretaking economy, we wouldn't necessarily need prisons because we would be taking care of our youth and our at-risk folk that are those most likely to be sent to prison, which is oftentimes like people commit crimes either because of necessity or because of where their environment. And so if we are if we are like the utmost like ideal of a caretaking economy, then hopefully we don't have those environments and necessity to like that makes those crimes so prevalent. And then obviously also just like the whole carceral system and judges and juries and prosecutors and all that, like that is pure a pure profit motive. And so if we get rid of that, hopefully we don't need that.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree. I feel like we could already start bringing or start what did Anna say? Using our love by instead of putting them straight into juvie for those. I guess there's different levels of crime, but we could start off by having a reimagined way to help put transition people like. If they're a first-time offender, maybe they'll get put into this type of reimagined center that will help them get the tools so that they don't have to keep continuously paying for their mistakes once they get out. They'll have resources or giving opportunity for people to build autonomy. Or, like lots of crimes are situational and some people aren't aware of the resources or support and they feel like they have to just try to figure things out on themselves. I think it's important that people understand that there's another option. It isn't just straight cut. It isn't just, oh, I have to sling to get by. There's other ways that you could also get by.
Yeah. What do you think, Marlene? Or Martha, if Marlene's not available.
Sorry, Professor. What do I think about like the caretaking economy, right, that we were talking about?
Yeah.
So when you asked us that question about like how do we see like our caretaking economy, I didn't immediately think about what I would see in a caretaking economy. I immediately thought of what I didn't want to see, which was what we have now. So of course I want to visualize what I want to see, but I feel like it's hard right now if I don't like physically see that withdrawal of what we have. And I know obviously we need to have some sort of visualization to be able to move towards that. But I don't think I have like a set image right now, right? It's obviously the kind of not necessarily the opposite of what we have, but kind of the opposite. Yeah.
Well, but that process is important too, right? Because I feel like when we experience an injustice, we know something doesn't feel good, right? So by naming that injustice, we can move to figuring out what can feel better. So for you, like, what are the things that really are calling to you as feeling like injustices that we need to remedy?
When I see, I think a couple of us on the call already mentioned it, but a lot of the injustice that I see is lack of just being able to have those resources for the up and coming like generation. Right. I feel like personally, like children are one of the most like important things in our future. And so not being able to have, I don't know, I keep reading studies about how like over 70% of kids in school in like California are in segregated schools, even though technically segregation is not legally a thing now. And so I just think about just like the differences in how we're treating different children, but also like the general caretaking jobs that we have now and how we undervalue or we don't deem them as deserving compared to like other jobs that we do have. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question.
No, yeah, definitely. We, because segregation was supposed to be done in what, the 1960s, but we're still seeing that happening. It ends up being de facto, right? It's okay, Ilse. Internet connections are not always reliable, so thank you for rejoining us. So yeah, we were just talking about the caretaking economy that we're envisioning, and what it is that we would change to transform our current economy to a caretaking economy. Do you have any thoughts on that? And you're on mute, just in case you didn't know. Oh, you can't hear me? Are you all having trouble hearing me? Oh, okay. Or also Marlene, I know you're in the car, but even if it's noisy, you can type it if that's better. As long as you're not driving. If you're driving, you probably should not even be on this call because I don't want you to get in an accident. Your safety is number one. Your health and safety is number one. Let's not forget that. I mean, and when Charmaine comes, Dr. Chua comes, you'll be able to talk much more about this because I know she's going to engage you all in discussion after she gives her talk. But I wanted to spend some time before we have our break at 2:50 to just kind of talk about what you've been reading and see if you have any questions about organizing. And then also just to let you know that now that you all are pretty much set up with your organizing project, I want the coming classes to actually give some time to be able to discuss what you're learning in your organizing projects so that we can really dive into how to help make these organizing projects feel as intersectional as they can in the way that we execute these campaigns. So just to give you a heads up to be ready to discuss those things when we have our future classes. But yeah, any questions about what you've been reading? Because I'm happy to go over any points that may have not been super clear.
I have a comment and it kind of like ties into like care communities, but I really like how she made a big point about housing and how that is really important, especially for the unhoused community, and how that was like how the unhoused became super vulnerable during the protests because they'd be, just shot with rubber bullets, just looking for a place to take shelter for the night, and then how they occupied that hotel and then moved to a different space. I thought that was really interesting, and I liked how she went into like the problems with that and how so many people that were like volunteering for the work weren't prepared to handle that kind of structure. So I think that's really interesting. I'd be interested to know like the best solutions for like creating communities like that.
like on the fly from protests.
Yeah, and then just like in general to create like, better, safer communities for the unhoused. Like I know we have community in Isla Vista that a lot of students like are not happy about, and luckily like they've kind of been shot down for like trying to move them. But I just think yeah, I'm just interested in like learning how to better organize around that.
Well, I don't know if you all have heard or seen, if you've been driving in LA, but right off the 101, they just erected a community of tiny houses for unhoused folks. So that is something that, it took some investment to do, but honestly, like that should not be that hard to recreate all over our communities. And even if you look at, I have a friend actually who has specifically been looking at how many homes are completely vacant in Santa Barbara County, and everybody can have a home, if not two homes, if people could just live in those vacant homes. So it's just so crazy to have houses that are built and fully functioning, and just because of our capitalist system, there hasn't been a way to integrate unhoused people into those homes. And Aaliyah saying, honestly, we should all just move into a tiny house community after grad together and sustain ourselves. Yeah, I mean, we can create our own little communes, right? And create our little co-ops. But yeah, definitely that would be beautiful. Any other questions or points that have come up? How has the training material been through the organizing for activists, the organizing manual for activists? Is everything kind of sinking in from that, or are there any questions from the strategy chart, from the ways to identify an issue, or anything related to coalition building or accountability sessions? Because after this class, we're kind of gonna go away from the training part of it and go into like your specific projects. That's why I'm giving us one last chance to talk about it before we move on to other stuff.
I don't have a question, more of a comment. So it was just really interesting in part of the book, and based on what you've taught us, when you told us in organizing we're addressing, or we're trying to get through to one certain individual because that's usually the weakest of an institution. So I've been getting a lot of emails from the, I don't know if I'm guessing you would know, the May Day thing on Monday, right? Across campus, and I saw like on like a, oh, I thought it was May 3rd on. Oh no, it's also okay here.
There is a different thing happening on May 3rd. But the thing on May 3rd, I think, is relating to the UC police stuff. The thing, yeah. But go ahead.
Yeah. I was thinking about the UC police one. And on one of like their booklets on like organizing and for organizations on campus, it said like focus on one specific individual. So it was just like, not that I didn't believe it from the book, but it was just really interesting to to see it like kind of transfer over to other organizations.
Yeah, it's true. It's like it's weird how organizing is so much like a science. But yeah, all this stuff tends to be really true. Any stuff that you've read that actually feels like it's not resonating, or it hasn't jived with your personal experience of organizing? It's just hard to tell because like 5 of you are not on screen. So I'm like trying to read like where everyone's at, but I can't with people not being on screen. And I understand if you know, need to be off screen, but it's just a little bit challenging when it comes to discussion.
What is the May 3rd event that you were talking about, Martha?
Oh, it's called May Day. Get cops off the UC campuses. I can send you the links, but I got it from a grad student that's like an abolitionist, and so there's a lot of things. So basically, they're trying to get faculty and students to not go to class and not do any work. Basically, as a protest against an increase of police budget on UC campuses.
I did want to speak to that because I just had a meeting with the President Drake of the whole UC yesterday through my role, and basically like, so there was a document put out which this is in response to, which was talking about increasing the budget, increasing access to weapons, all these things that students don't want. Essentially, that document came from a several year long review under the Napolitano administration. And it's gone out now because it has to go out for review. But first of all, like, just to preface, I don't trust President Drake at all. But he did tell us that that is not like the document that they are currently working off of. And that they are working on a different set of policies. This is from past years and no longer is applicable. So I just wanted to like let people know about that. Although I still don't think that they're gonna make like the change students want. I don't think this is necessarily like going to go into effect like students think it is. Like very soon.
Interesting. Yeah, and Charmaine, Dr. Chua is going to tell you all about that action because that's what she's going to be talking to you all about. Thank you. But I was just going to mention a couple of the other responses that kind of relate to what Aaliyah was saying right now about how they won't take effect immediately, right? But with these issues, I think with students, administrators are so smart. And Martha, you pointed it out in your reflection paper that actions can sometimes cut years off of organizing. And so the opposite of that is not having actions, right? And then where they always want to put things in committees. They love to put things in committees, especially with students, because they know they just have to wait you out 4 years, sometimes 2 years, right? If you're a transfer student. So if you've heard this term called death by committee, that's what that means, is that whatever the issue is, and the thing with, yes, and task forces, exactly. And that's how they can pretend like they're still doing something on your issue by just having a task force or a committee. But if there's not clear division of labor on who's going to do what and clear timelines on, okay, this committee or this task force is going to get this figured out by this date, then it's just going to drag on, and then it's just going to die, right? So I would just really caution you on committees and task forces. Like the more we can get things done by actions, the better, because that way there's that accountability, right? When people agree to something that you asked for in an action, then it's just about the implementation. And then the implementation is a whole thing within itself, right? Because the hunger strike that I thought Dr. Armbruster Sandoval was going to talk to you all about, but he didn't very much, is they did win their demands, but the implementation took a super long time. And some of the things, from my understanding, they're still on their process. And that was from a 1994 hunger strike. What year are we in now? 2021, right? That are still like in process now. So just like the most that you can do in actions, the better. And also I just wanted to point out Ellison's comment too in her reflection journal was, when I was reading Jackson Rising, it really helped me gain that vision of what this solidarity economy looks like. what an economy that truly supports and values all individuals can be like. And connecting it with Dr. Armbruster Sandoval's talk and Dr. Bullard's talk. So Dr. Bullard, in case you didn't get a chance to hear from him, he's pretty much known as like the godfather of environmental justice. And so his talk was really amazing. If you didn't get a chance to check it out, I'll try to find out if it's recorded. But it's just so many things that, white affluent folks take for granted is like such an issue for those of us who are working class people of color. And the beautiful thing about Jackson Rising is they're showing that it can be done, right? So I think the issue that we're going through right now is that imagination, right? Being able to envision and imagine what a different world looks like. And so if we have these examples of what people are already doing, then they're showing us, right, that these things are possible if we can just get over our fear. Once we make it to that other side of fear, everything opens up. And so I just want to remind ourselves like how important your heart, your brain, right, everything that you bring to the table are, because you are going to be the ones creating this new world. And it's going to be beautiful. And I have so much faith in you. And I hope you have that faith in yourselves and in your families and your communities, because this is a collective struggle. And I know that we will be victorious. So thank you for the heart. But yeah, anything else on that vision? If not, we can take in your full 20 minutes of break now before Dr. Chua comes on, or we can talk a little bit more and have a 10-minute break. Do y'all prefer 10 or 20 right now? You can put in the chat if that's easier. Okay, perfect. We'll take 20 then. We'll see you back at 3:03. Hi, Charmaine.
Hi,
Good to see you, Dr. Chua.
good to see you.
Everyone's coming back from their break in 1 minute.
Okay, cool. I'm
How
just
was
gonna I'm just gonna prep then.
Thanks everyone for coming back on time. I want to thank Dr. Chua so much for coming fresh from a meeting, from an organizing meeting, and just to introduce you all to her. I put the bio on our Gaucho Space page, but just in case you didn't read it, I'm going to read it to you now. So Dr. Chua is an assistant professor of global studies at UCSB. She is a scholar of global political economy, supply chains, and imperialism. She has been a community organizer in abolitionist and immigrant rights movements for more than a decade, and currently organizes with UC Cops Off Campus, the Abolition Collective, and Amazonians United. So please welcome Dr. Chua to our class, and Lydia is joining us as well. So that's the one person we were waiting for. Thanks, everybody. Yay, Dr. Chua, thank you for being here.
Hi everyone, so nice to see you all. I've met some of you and not others, so hope to get to know you over the course of your time at UCSB. Would it be too much trouble for you to introduce yourselves? Maybe just your year at UCSB, and I don't know what else you would like to say, perhaps like your major? Maybe starting with Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a second year transfer student in my last quarter at UCSB. My major is sociology with the applied psych minor. And I can popcorn it to Cicely.
Hi, I'm Cicely. I'm in my last quarter as well. I'm a social major with a professional writing on the civic engagement track minor. And then I'll popcorn it to Martha.
Hi, Professor. My name is Martha. I'm a third year environmental studies. I think we met before, yeah. And I'll popcorn it to Allison.
Allison, I can't hear you. No. Now you're good.
Yeah, I think I just heard you.
Oh, now you can hear me?
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay, sorry. I'm a fourth year earth science major with an education minor. And I'll popcorn Taylor.
Hi, Professor. I'm a fourth year last quarter, and I'm double majoring in global studies and English. And I'll popcorn to Zita.
Did you say to me? Oh, okay. Hi, Professor. My name is Ilse. I'm a fifth year sociology major, Black Studies minor. And I will popcorn it to Cicely. Have you gone? Okay, I will pass it on to Marlene then.
Hi, Professor. My name is Marlene. I'm a second year sociology major, hoping to get the minor in applied psychology. And I'll pass it to Ari.
Who's Ari?
She's not here right now. She has side effects from her second vaccine dose, so she wasn't able to join us.
So are we good? Did Lydia go?
I think I'm the last one.
Okay, go for it, Lydia.
Hello. I just turned my camera on. I'm in my car right now, about to leave. I'm Lydia. I am a 4th year, 2-year UCSB transfer. I'm majoring in sociology, minoring in applied psych.
Super. Okay. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves to me. You're probably sick of, hearing each other by now, and you probably know each other pretty well. Alia, did I miss you?
Yeah, sorry, I was in the bathroom.
Okay. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, my name is Aaliyah. I'm a 4th year philosophy and global studies double major. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you all. Okay, so I didn't miss anyone now, right? Everyone's gone? Okay, fantastic. This is an all-women class. That's crazy. I don't think I've ever had a class like this at UCSB, so that's really, really exciting, and I want to thank you all for willing to take a risk on what is a pioneer program. But we're so lucky that, we're starting this intersectional justice certificate, and so lucky that we have Ana Rosa teaching it as an incredibly seasoned community organizer in the UCSB area and nationally. So if you don't know, and she's probably downplayed her accomplishments, Ana Rosa has been a stalwart and a cornerstone of Santa Barbara organizing for decades, and has been a longtime labor organizer and has organized in all of these areas. So you're really, I think, really privileged to be able to learn from her. Okay, so what I would like to do today is really just talk for 10 minutes or so, and then I would really love to just open it up and to have a conversation. You read an article that I wrote, and I just want to sort of give it a little bit of context and say that as a scholar, I am a scholar of political economy, and that means that I look at the ways in which shifts in global capital accumulation, especially since the 1960s, have become a reason and a source for different kinds of state-sponsored violence. And one of those is the ways in which the prisons and policing system became a specific response in the 1960s to a lot of problems that the US state was encountering at the time. If some of you have taken political economy classes, this might sound a little bit familiar to you, but in the 1960s, we started to see this mass movement of industrialization and manufacturing out of the US and into other places where labor was cheaper. And there's lots to say about that, but part of the big moment to mark is that this is the same time where there are massive shifts also going on with the desegregation of the US under Jim Crow, where in the shift to deindustrialization, you started to have mass numbers of workers in the streets, unemployed, and not knowing where to go, right, now that they had lost these industrial jobs. So the famous pictures you see of Detroit car factories being empty are sort of all symptomizing this, right? And this was the same time that we started to see a mass rise in mass incarceration, where the US state, under different kinds of laws and commitments via Nixon, started to really police Black and brown working class people who, having lost their jobs, right, and becoming part of this kind of surplus population, started to need another solution. So there could have been, right, an investment in trying to figure out what to do with all of this, with these people, by increasing funding of public housing, by increasing social welfare policy, by increasing the possibilities for us to look to not just industrial capitalism, but to other forms of sustenance to answer this problem of deindustrialization. But instead, what the US did, right, was massively increase the prison system and massively increase efforts to police cities so that they could make cities kind of empty grounds for real estate accumulation and property accumulation. So you see at the same time the rise of things like vagrancy laws, an increase in policing homeless populations, an increase in efforts to basically find ways to make illegal what it means to be poor. And we can talk about examples of all of that. So the reason why I start with this is just that I think for me, abolition really begins with an on-the-ground look at what the state, why the state, in a sense, needs to create these policies like the prisons and like policing in order to produce its racism, right? So very often when you hear people talk about prisons and policing, people talk about it just in moral terms, like this, it is wrong that mass incarceration increased. And part of why I think it's important that we ask why the prison expanded this much in the 1960s is it helps us to see how the state chose racist segregation and chose, right, to change the 13th Amendment into a legitimation of imprisonment for Black and brown folks, rather than to think about alternative forms of provisioning. And that's really where abolition gets us, right? And I know that you spent all of last quarter or 2 quarters ago with Matt Harris thinking through this, but I think, just to reiterate where we are, right? That's why abolition demands that we not just think about getting rid of prisons and police, but also all of the alternative forms of building and community and affirmative modes of thinking about how else we might keep community safe that have to come in its wake. So the piece that you read was coming out of organizing work that, I was in Minneapolis organizing as a graduate student for 8 years between 2009 to 2017. And then I went back during the George Floyd uprising to help my comrades there. And as you read, we walked into this hotel, right, that had been made empty by COVID. So there's all sorts of interesting ways that the convergences of this disaster of the global health pandemic actually became a really interesting opportunity for us to demand that this hotel be kind of taken over. So we walked in, and by the first day, 200 people had come. By the second day, 500 people had come. And by the third day, we had a waiting list of 1,000 people trying to stay in this hotel, right? To stay from the National Guard in the midst of a massive global uprising where the National Guard was everywhere on the street. And part of what I think is so shocking about that is it speaks to the mass need, right? The fact that over 1,500 unhoused people desperately needed a place to stay and were particularly subject, right, to the state and its mobilization of martial violence in response to the protests. So I tell that story for 2 reasons, right? One is that I think that a lot of press has been dedicated in the George Floyd uprising to thinking about the spectacular forms of violence, what it means that a police station was burned, right? What it means that, like in Portland, people were facing off with leaf blowers with the police. And all of that's wonderful and another way to think about what struggle looks like on the ground. But I wanted also to think about all of the other much more invisible forms of care work that go on with abolitionist movements, and a lot of which doesn't get featured in the newspaper and isn't spectacular and therefore just gets neglected, right? And to make the case, I think that mutual aid is really, I think, at the heart of it, what abolition is about, right? It's about envisioning what might be possible when we don't depend on the state and we don't wait for the permission to enact and build the communities we want, but we take that into our own hands and try to do that ourselves. And that's what the Sanctuary Hotel was. That's what we, try to continue to do in the Cops Off Campus campaign, which I'll say a little bit about in a second. So that's the first piece, right? That spectacular violence is one thing, but how do we think about mutual aid as a source for abolitionist movements, and what is the promise in thinking along those lines? Then the second point I want to just make is that, since that article was written, Daunte Wright has been killed in Minnesota, and this time he was killed in Brooklyn Center, which is a suburb, a primarily Black and brown working class suburb outside of Minnesota. Once this happened, thousands of Minneapolis protesters showed up to that suburb to protest Daunte Wright's killing. And immediately, right, within 2 hours, they had mobilized the National Guard. There were thousands of troops. There was a line of 80 tanks and military vehicles, and they had put up fences. This was the time that the Chauvin trial was also ongoing, so the militarization of Minneapolis right now is really quite shocking to watch. But there are two reasons I want to talk about that, right? One is that the state can close in very quickly on successful rounds of protest. So the 3rd precinct burned in Minneapolis in part because the police were not expecting it. But now they have come back in force, right? And they've now sort of legitimated this mass mobilization of National Guard in a way that we haven't seen for decades in the US and across places. Right now, once protests rise, the National Guard comes out. So one thing I wanted to say about that is the importance of thinking about how even as we're fighting for the abolition of the police, even as we try to fight for the abolition of the police, the state also is a massively powerful counter-revolutionary force. And what I mean by that is the state has so many resources at its hand, right, to figure out what it looks like to crack down on protests the next round. And that, I think, is something very serious that we have to deal with, because counter-revolution is a way of recycling the successes of movements and folding them back into the legitimation of the state in ways that I think we really have to think about. So here's 2 other examples, right? At the same time that the National Guard was dismantled, so last year in May, when George Floyd was murdered and there was this global uprising, I don't know if you remember, but the University of Minnesota, and actually this was led by undergrad students, demanded that the University of Minnesota sever all ties with the Minneapolis Police Department. This was seen as a massive victory. It's not been done before at any public university in this way, right? But the University of Minnesota still has its own police force. It's called the UMPD. And so 9 months later, when Dante Wright was killed and the police were coming in force to protect Brooklyn Center, or to protect the idea of the state, right, from protesters, guess who they mobilized with them? The University of Minnesota police force was also mobilized to assist the regular police forces in Brooklyn Center. So here we see again, right, there's these like wonderful moments of victory where it was beautiful and incredible that, you know, the UMPD severed ties. But of course what happened is that the University of Minnesota police then legitimizes the need, right, to have a special campus police force. Okay, so that's the kind of Minneapolis piece of the puzzle, and it kind of links us now to me talking a little bit about cops off campus. Because I think what we see in the fact that campuses have their own police forces is part of the same logic. So go back to the same moment that I started with in the 1960s, right? The 1960s were also the time when public university campuses were starting to open up to more Black and brown and working class students. In the 1960s, the enrollment of Black and brown students at public universities increased by something like 3 times, at the same time that tuition increased by 476%. So you get more diverse universities at the very same time that universities become a for-profit institution. And literally, in the, you know, when the University of California Charter was written, it was written so that college would be free, right? It literally said the University of California should not cost students any money. Fast forward in 1966, Reagan, who was campaigning to be governor at that time, actually then said that, you know, tuition would be a punitive system. In other words, it would discipline students into having to take on loans, to take on the payment of fees, and he wanted it to literally be a punitive response to what was growing student protests. So the 60s, again, right, massive moment, because not only are you seeing lots of people lose jobs, you're also seeing an escalation of US militarism. So universities across the US, right, were a massive site for protesting the war in Vietnam, protesting the invasion of Cambodia, protesting segregation, protesting university-supported research funds in the militarization of the Department of Defense. And all of this happened at the same time that a report that was issued, let me see, what's the name of the report? So the report was then, there was a report that was then commissioned in the aftermath of the Kent State shooting, which happened in 1970, where this is a very famous instance where the National Guard shot into a crowd of students and killed 2 of them. So President Nixon commissioned this report called the Report of the President's Commission on Campus Unrest. And in the report, basically what it says is, we need to find an answer to campus disorder. And the solution for them was the police. So think about this, right? The university as a place for the education of people, for the public expression of what learning should be, starts to become a site of the military industrial complex, starts to become a site where even as students are mobilizing their education, right, to demand anti-imperialist struggle be taken seriously, to protest war, this is the time when the US sees itself as not just having to fight wars abroad, but having to fight wars at home, against students and against people who they saw as dangerous to the US mission, right? So this is when we start to see a massive increase in police departments. And today, there's $134 billion that is usually allotted to what is called the US federal research budget. And half of that money is distributed to US universities to fund combat training for campus and police fund combat training for campus police, to fund ROTC programs, to fund security and surveillance programs, and to fund the creation of military weapons. Okay, so why am I talking about this? Because I don't know if you've heard, but the UC has recently proposed to basically put 4 revisions into its university-wide policing revisions. And one of those is the creation of what they're calling the system-wide response team, which for them is a UC version of a National Guard or a UC version of a SWAT team, where what they want to do is to mobilize UC police across the state to respond to suppression of student protests anywhere. If you were paying attention last year when the Santa Cruz graduate students went on a wildcat strike to argue for a cost of living adjustment, the UCSB police were mobilized to Santa Cruz to suppress Santa Cruz students, right? And this is actually a statewide structure that is built into the UCPD. The UCPD has California-wide jurisdiction. And what this means is that basically the UC is allowed to and can pull from any force at any time to come and support their troops, right? So what the UC is now trying to do is basically regularize this process by creating this massive paramilitary force. And I'll drop links in the chat once I'm done talking where you can read more about this. But the quick thing about this is it should be entirely shocking, right? That in the midst of these global and national calls for the defunding and the abolition and the dismantling of police departments, that the UC, in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of students struggling to pay rent, in the midst of highest levels of food insecurity than we've ever seen, is proposing effectively to inject millions of dollars into the UC department. So let me just tell you some of the things that this system-wide response team wants to argue for. They justify the need to protect dignitaries who visit campus. They want to create a military-style entity deployed in team and squad formations. They recommend that among the equipment used will be helmets with face shields, 36-inch batons, gas masks, soft riot armor, flex cuffs, kinetic energy projectiles, which are rubber bullets, chemical agents, pelter headsets, and many of the what police departments now call less than lethal weapons, by which they mean not bullets that will kill you, right? But many of these have in fact killed protesters over the years since they've been introduced. So this is what we're dealing with, right? That as students are being empowered to think about what it actually means to be a citizen in the world where you are fighting where you're fighting against racial injustice, that the UC system is finding ways to basically shut down and suppress student protest. So I think I'll just stop there and say, right, I hope that what I've made clear is that there's a deep link between campus policing and policing outside of the campus. That I think what we're fighting against is much more pernicious than then we know that the state has a really sneaky way, right, of kind of like snaking around and appropriating struggle at any one time. And so the challenge for us, right, is that we can't just push against these reforms on a reform by reform basis. We can't, for example, just say, right, please don't create the system-wide response team, but it's okay for a police force to exist. Because death and the increase and funding of these police forces are the outcome of reforms. The more you say, right, that it's not the police that's the problem, but that reform is but that this particular reform is the problem, the more historically has has the state and have police been able to say, okay, so we'll do this one reform, right? So in 2014, when Mike Brown was killed, the primary demand was to create body-worn cameras. Research has since shown that body-worn cameras do not actually decrease the use of violence, does not increase killing, but in fact just increases images of Black death. And in fact, one of the UCPD revisions now is precisely that they've distributed body-worn cameras, and now they're trying to create policy to regularize it, and that policy includes all sorts of discretionary use where basically police can submit whenever they don't want the video to be released, they can submit a proposal for it to be wiped, and that's it. So we're dealing with stuff here, right, that's really sneaky, because every time a death happens, the police will say what we need is better training, more accurate projectiles, better weapons, and kinder, gentler use of force, right? And what we're dealing with today is the outcome of those reforms. So that for me is the reason why I am an abolitionist, in the sense that I don't think that reform is enough, right? I think that the police are constitutively a violent force, that they are constitutively founded in the exercise of state violence. And if we take that really seriously, then it demands that we have to argue for their abolition, even as we're doing all of this work, right, to build up the mutual aid and all of the other things that we're doing to make safe communities ourselves. Okay, I'll stop there. I talked way longer than I expected to. Sorry about that. So maybe I'll just open up here and see if you don't have to have a question, if you want to just respond, if you want to ask for clarifications about some of these policies, or if you want to talk a little bit about the essay, I'm happy to go in whatever direction you want. And towards the end, maybe what I'll do is just talk a little bit about Abolition May and the Cops Off Campus movement and what we're trying to do. So yeah, I'll just open up and you can just raise your hand or talk as you want.
I know one thing that that folks had mentioned before you came on is from reflecting on what you wrote is how were you prepared to heed the call or meet the need for housing in that hotel, and how can you envision that other folks can be prepared in situations where it's kind of on the fly, so to speak? But then also the other question was some people hadn't heard yet about the Monday, May 3rd action, so they wanted to know more about how they can plug in.
Okay, should I start with the Monday, May 3rd action? Maybe I'll just do that so we can talk about that for a second. So I'm dropping into the chat the Cops Off Campus Coalition website. Cops Off Campus began in March of 2020 as the COLA strike was being brutally suppressed by the UC administration. Faculty got together and basically said, how do we want to keep organizing together? And the thing we came to just as the George Floyd uprising was kind of on the rise was that we wanted to link labor struggles to the struggles against the struggles for the abolition of the the abolition of the UCPD, but maybe also the abolition of the UC. And what this meant is that we have our demands are simple, right? We want the dismantling of the UCPD. We think it's totally ridiculous that it is the norm on US campuses to have its own police forces. This doesn't exist in the majority of places around the world. In fact, it's only the UK and South Africa and a couple of other countries where there are university police forces, right? So it shouldn't even be that weird. Like, what we're asking for is not that extreme. What we're asking for is basically to follow the example of the rest of the world. So what we're doing on towards Abolition May is that Abolition May is a month-long demand across more than 30 campuses, actually now probably about 40 campuses across North America, where we are all collectively demanding the abolition of police departments across all universities. And our demands are simple. We want cops off campus. We demand that universities which are embedded in settler colonialism think about what it means to give the land back. We want investments in community safety, and we want to imagine a world beyond policing. So this starts on May 3rd with a walkout. We're asking students who can to not attend class and to send their professors a note that they are taking a stand to demand cops off campus. There's all sorts of language around this, and I'll just send you, here is a kind of resource link where there's tons of resources in that document that basically are templates that you can send your professors, a video lecture you can tell them to substitute class with. It's a little bit late for that, so I don't know how many faculty will actually respond to something like that, but you could certainly take the stand to not appear in class. I do know that it's midterms period, so understandably everyone is a little stressed. And if you feel like you can't afford to take the day off, or a midterm is due on that day, I think the minimum is, if you have a class on that day, to not attend, or in some form to try to direct some of your attention that day towards educating others about what abolition is. So yeah, I think, okay, so that's May 3rd. Then what we're doing for the rest of the month of May is every campus that is part of the coalition is going to do what's called a rolling series of actions. So each campus has signed up for a certain day where they're going to do their own actions. So Yale is doing one, Penn is doing one, UIUC is doing one. UCSB's day is May 17th, and we're going to start meeting at Sea Lookout Park at 6 p.m. It's a Monday. And I think we're going to start with some testimonials from underground scholars about disproportionate policing on campus. Then we're going to do a march, and we'll end with a vigil at Stark Tower to remember Ma'Khia Bryant and many of the other Black and brown youth who've been killed by police violence. And then finally on May 25th, it all culminates because May 25th is the day that George Floyd was murdered, with us kind of, just joining people in the streets in marches across our cities. So that's the plan for Abolition May. And we ask that you just join us in whatever way you can. If it's too late now to join us for May 3rd, then please, by all means, if you're on campus, join us on May 17th for this march. And you can follow on Twitter and Instagram UCFTP or UCSB FTP. And both of those will give you all the information you need on all of this stuff. Okay, so let me speak to this question about how to heed the call around housing. I guess the short answer to this is we weren't prepared. I went to Minneapolis on the invitation of comrades that I had, organized with for a long time, who just felt the need for experienced organizational leadership on the ground. I didn't go just to be a spectator. And so I just want to say, first of all, that the idea of flying someplace where conflict has happened shouldn't be par for the course, right? I only really did it because I have deep roots in that place. But we weren't prepared. Really what happened is that the National Guard started rolling in. This had never happened in the US, at least since 1992, since other major riots. And my friends work very closely with unhoused people, and they just started seeing people being shipped off in busloads to suburbs in the suburbs of Minnesota. And many of these unhoused people reported just being shot by rubber bullets by National Guard for no reason. So part of what we were doing is just responding to a desperate need at the time. It was not safe to be on the streets. Many of the unhoused folks in Minnesota are disproportionately Indigenous, Dakota, Lakota. Indigenous people are 25 times more likely to be homeless in their lives than white people in Minnesota. So we really felt that we just had to respond. And so I think what the Sanctuary Hotel was not a long-term solution, right? We definitely acknowledged that. It was a short-term palliative solution to what is a deep and ongoing housing crisis. And we did what was necessary in the moment to keep people safe. But I think since then, you know, what has happened is that I think more than before, the kind of the the problem of homelessness was put on the table in a much more visible way than most people have had to deal with before, because all of a sudden, right, this hotel in the middle of a fancy area of town is full of unhoused people. And then when the hotel was shut down, most of those people went to this park where they occupied the park for nearly 3 months. And so a lot of like self-satisfied white people in Minnesota had to suddenly deal with the fact that they had neighbors, right, who were unhoused people. And they started out saying things like, welcome, you're my neighbor, you know, this is your community too. And then the backlash happened quite quickly, right? And of course, all of this is really complicated, as I wrote about. It's, you know, I think one of the things that we have to reckon with as abolitionists is what it means to be honest about the challenges that we face, right? I think it's not enough just to say, like, that we don't have the answers. We do have to be able to admit that, you know, if the police are gone tomorrow, there will still be violence, right? Let's not pretend, and we don't have to be naive and to say that, you know, if the police are gone, everything will be hunky-dory. I think we actually have to build those alternatives. So yeah, I mean, I think my answer to that question would just be that, like, we need to think about different kinds of tactical moves that respond at different moments, right? So just yesterday in Chicago, a friend texted me that some people tried to take over a dorm to house unhoused people. And it just made me so joyful to hear that all of these empty properties, right? Like all of the empty properties that have been left by the pandemic, people are thinking about ways to demand that private property be used for other reasons that respond to social need. So I think that in itself, that direct action tactic is really powerful as a way to burst open the kind of logics of who the state provides for. But it's, you know, certainly has to happen alongside the demand for more public housing, for free housing, right, for housing for all of the other stuff that people are doing at the legislative level, so on and so forth, to increase homeless services across the US.
So funny that you mentioned that, because we were also talking about that before you joined on. I actually have a friend that did a study and found out that in Santa Barbara County, with all the vacant houses that exist, every homeless person can have a home, or I think she said even two. And just the fact that these private buildings can just be there, you know, not be used when there's such a big need for people to be housed is crazy to me. And when you were talking about the UC response teams, I had to take a deep breath. I don't know if anybody else had to as well, but it's just crazy that this institution of education is investing so heavily in basically militarization. And that should be shocking, like you said, to everybody. Like, people should be in an uproar about this. And I'm just wondering if you think that most people know that this is happening, or if we just need to get the education out and get folks to start responding.
Yeah, not a lot of people know it's happening. This is like very recent. It was sent to faculty in this this one of these memos that is really easy to ignore. So nobody caught it until pretty recently. And then basically comments are due May 3rd. So we're scrambling to create more awareness around it. I have an op-ed drafted that's going to try to go to the New York Times or to somewhere else to basically expose what's happening. But yeah, I mean, if you are able through all your channels, I think it would be great to kind of spread the word as much as you can. But I want to maybe just open it up and see if just like, you don't have to have questions for me. Do you just have thoughts about, or maybe I'll just ask you this. What is your feeling about the UC PD? Have you had encounters with them? What is your general sense of the role that they play on this campus?
I had a strange encounter somewhat recently, maybe a couple months ago, where I was like walking through IV and this police officer pulled over and he said something where me and my friend didn't realize he was talking to us because someone on a motorcycle was right next to us. And so we thought he was talking to him. And he was like, oh, okay, just ignore me. And so we kind of turned around and we were like, oh, were you talking to us? And he handed us like 3 pieces of paper and said, we're working on updating our mission and our values statements and seeking student feedback. And I was like wondering if you could give me feedback on this. So he just kind of like stopped us in IV and asked for feedback on their mission. And I knew that like, we were actively organizing for cops off campus. And so I thought it was kind of interesting that they're like wandering Isla Vista seeking student input on updating their mission statement because they know that students are trying to get them off campus.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Do you have those pieces of paper still?
No, we had to give it back to him. He wanted us to he handed us a pen and said, can you write notes on this piece of paper? Which I also was like, in the middle of the pandemic, you're handing a bunch of people the same piece of paper.
It's so ridiculous.
But yeah, he didn't give it to us.
It wasn't even like a democratic process online or something. They were literally just walking around.
Yeah, like he definitely could have been handpicking who, like we were both white, the two of us that he chose to ask. And I'm sure that was like strategically decided that he was like, they're probably trying to find an excuse to be like, oh yeah, students love our mission statement, so we're gonna push it forward.
Yeah. Anybody else have interactions? Maybe while you're thinking, I'll just mention that in the aftermath of the Atlanta shootings at the massage parlors, the UCPD Community Outreach Task Force reached out to the API task force to ask if there was anything they could do to protect Asian American communities. And 2 weeks later, when Michael Drake releases a letter about racial injustice, he actually says, like, we denounce, the killing of Dante Wright, and we pledge to prosecute hate crimes on behalf of our Asian American community. And so there's definitely a kind of mobilization, right, of this image of the UC as like protecting people. And really what a lot of Asian American abolitionists argue is that actually hate crime prosecution increases the power of the state to basically target Black and brown folks. Hate crime legislation has almost never been used on white supremacist terrorists or that sort of thing, right? So there's something really pernicious going on here where like the UC itself is doing this stuff alongside the police and making it seem like they're kinder and gentler and they're doing all of this for you, right? When really what they're doing is like trying to find ways to increase state-sanctioned violence. Okay, so let me open it up again. Aaliyah, please go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say on the topic of President Drake, I've had many interactions with him as well as with police, the UCPD chiefs. One, it's no surprise to me that he released a statement like that, considering his past actions are so in line with that. I'm sure you know about it, but like for people that don't know, the Irvine 11 incident when President Drake was, before he was President Drake, he was the whatever it's called, chancellor of UC Irvine. And at that time, the campus brought, I forget exactly who it was, but it was some official representing Israel to campus, and students from the SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, there protested, and Chancellor Drake, at the time as chancellor, had them all arrested and prosecuted. So that is on the basis of anti-Semitism, I think. So that is no surprise to me. And then in addition, like just with, I guess, like personal interactions with police, obviously I'm white. I haven't experienced like discrimination and racism at all with police, but I have experienced going in and being asked to give trainings to police as a student to train them in how to interact with survivors of sexual assault, because that is the work that I do. And we did agree to do that because at the beginning we thought it would help. We were like, okay, well, we are students, we are survivors ourselves, maybe we can give them tools. And this was under the leadership of the interim chief before the new chief, who was later accused of sexual harassment himself. And so that type of interaction where we literally came in under his request, gave our free labor and time to train these officers, to attempt to train these officers who obviously didn't really take it in, let alone the chief himself, who then sexually harassed someone, was really disheartening. I just don't personally interact or ever
work with the police now because I don't trust them in any way. And I don't believe that even giving them extra trainings as students, like doing these things where they're like, okay, maybe we can help reform the police by training them or having them listen to student input. Well, it doesn't work anyway. So I don't really know. It's just disheartening, I guess.
Aaliyah, thank you so much for sharing that. It's particularly brutal and scary, right? When questions around sexual assault and trauma become part of what the police try to weaponize. And I think it's what you're pointing to is a real dilemma, right? For people who suffer disproportionate violence and who know what it would look like to, help people respond better to other victims of sexual assault, sometimes it feels like, yeah, I want to make things better, And I think part of what you're pointing to is the way that gets weaponized too, right? So again, it's this counter-revolutionary thing where it's like we are pulled into this idea that we can make things a little bit better for the people who are suffering under the hands of these really violent forces. And I wonder if other people are resonating with that, because to me, that's one of the biggest challenges, right? It's the fact that people are in prison right now, and there is a mass incarceration crisis right now. And some abolitionists are of this position, right? That you don't go into prisons, you don't teach them, you don't run Shakespeare programs there because it just makes prisons seem like better places. It makes them rehabilitable. In the same way, right, that Aaliyah is pointing out, do you go and help train police forces, or do you take this stance that you refuse to work with them? And I think that the point about task forces is really important, because across the last year, the UCPD has put together these task forces, right? It said, come talk to us at these campus safety symposiums. They've, at every UC campus, asked faculty to serve on what are these, policing task force boards. And none of that is reflected in the UCPD proposed revisions that I talked about. Literally none. There has been no consultation with faculty, right? So yeah, I'm just curious if other folks have thoughts about this kind of bind that we're in, where, the police want us to make them better, but every time we try to make them better, right, they keep on sort of recycling logics of that becoming a legitimation of their continued existence.
Definitely, it's that reformist argument, and it's just hard because no matter how many reforms you put in, when it's a broken system, you can't take away from the fact that it's a broken system. And as long as we're trying to reform it, we're not envisioning how to create something new that's better, right? So it's like almost time stolen from that new world that we're trying to create, where people are treated as human beings and, right, not just disposable. I just wanted to ask, because May Day is coming up upon us. So you all have the May 3rd action, but there are also several caravans happening throughout Santa Barbara and Ventura County. So if you have anything that you would like us to be spreading on that day, we can be posting that. Like there's the Earth Day to May Day page on Facebook, and then several of our organizations are also participating. And then for the Junta Grande that we're having for the Green New Deal Health Meeting campaign that we did, abolition is actually something that came up in a lot of our meetings. So we're highlighting abolition as part of what we're seeing as integral to the Green New Deal. So if there's anything you would like us to uplift there too, that's going to happen on May 15th at noon. So yeah, pass over anything that you would like us to share.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I have another 10 minutes before I have to go. Does anyone have questions or thoughts you want to share? How are you thinking about your participation in Abolition May? How are you feeling about that?
I don't want to take up too much space. I'll just be really quick. I just sent an email I only have one class that day. I just sent an email to the professor, but I have a quiz scheduled every Monday on that class. And the professor is an international professor along with the TA. And I know that sometimes international professors and TAs are more hesitant to participate in this stuff because they can be, what's it called? When you're not punished, but you know, like more easily, they can be, I'm not using the right word, but punished more easily for this. So I just like, if anyone wants the template I used, like I can send it in our group message too, but I basically just said like, asked her to cancel class if it is possible, and if not, to at least talk about what's going on during class if she doesn't feel comfortable. And I said, you know, if it's negatively impacting my grade not to come, I will likely come because I do need to keep my grades up. But at the same time, I said I support this movement and would really like to like not cross the picket line.
Really appreciate that, Aaliyah. Yeah, if you would share that template, that would be really useful for folks, I think. The links I sent also have those. Yeah, I want to say two things. I'm an international, I'm a foreigner to the US. I've been here for 17 years on different temporary visas, and this is what people actually always say. They say, "Oh, are you international? You should really fear what you're doing because you're going to get punished." And I think that it's fucked up that, you know, the system is held against you in a way to punish people who are subjects of border imperialism from participating in struggle. So one, I think that's totally understandable, and I think it's true that international students and international faculty are, you know, subject to more kind of retaliation. But I think it's also important that we still encourage folks, right, to take risks, because we're all taking risks in different kinds of ways. And at the end of the day, this is literally like a day of canceling classes in the same way that you might cancel a class when you're sick, you know? So that's one thing. And the other, of course, is that nobody should feel like they're jeopardizing a grade. So if there is a test, if there is a quiz, obviously, please don't take the punishment of, you know, not doing that just to support abolition. May participate in a way that feels good to you. But yeah, if you find a way to just talk about abolition on that day, right, even to a friend, that would make a huge difference.
One question that somebody raised before you came on to is the struggle with abolition of feeling so clear, like what's wrong about what we currently have, but like what is the path from getting to the outrage of where we are to envisioning that new system, for lack of a better word, of how it can be, right? So do you have any ideas on that?
I love that question, Anna. And I mean, I really would love to hear what your own thoughts are. I guess I'll just say, you know, that the experience that I wrote about in the essay that you read it's changed the way I've thought about abolitionist struggle. And it's changed it because part of what I realized is that when you think about abolition on this horizon, right, where it feels like it'll never come and what you're asking for feels so impossible, it always feels like this infinitely deferred dream. And the question of like what you can do in the now to do that always feels like, well, how on earth do I get like a full city to commit to getting rid of a police force? That's impossible. So the first thing I would just say is it's impossible to do alone, right? These things, the fact that Minneapolis was so successful at putting abolition on the table was because of a massive force. And it was a massive force over years because Minneapolis first saw police deaths all the way back in the early 2000s, but especially when Jamar Clark was killed in 2016. I mean, each time it happened, right, they demanded reform. And then at the point where George Floyd was killed, after Philando had been killed, after Jamar Clark had been killed, people were just sick of it. And so the mass demand in the streets is what made it work, right? So that's, I think, the first thing to say, that these can all feel impossible until you realize that what you're working on is a massive scale to organize the conditions where it will be possible for all of us to get on this train together, right? So I think the little things like talking to a friend about abolition sometimes doesn't feel like it's gonna do much, but you're moving people towards that horizon, right? And thank you, Taylor, for quoting from it. Abolition is a horizon, it's not an event. You're always pushing people towards that moment. And so I think just in that way too, the kinds of things that the possibilities that exist to build mutual aid in the now exist, right? SASA exists. I know Aaliyah does some work with this. Just having efforts to build, right, pods of people who support each other through transformative justice and restorative justice, to imagine what it looks like. So, for example, right, the simplest thing I would just say is like, I know sexual assault is a huge issue at UCSB, but the cops have never solved a rape. In 2016, there was 967 arrests. Half of them were for drug possession and alcohol. 0 were for rape, right? The cops don't solve that stuff. And what does stop people from getting sexually assaulted are when you notice your friend being drunk and you pull her back from being taken into a room with some sketchy person, right? That's abolition in work. That's abolition in its very core. And so I guess all I would say is, when we imagine that the possibility of abolition may not come tomorrow, but that we're willing to do in whatever ways we can the work to build those communities and to empower each other to imagine that possibility, that's when we can really start to see how it starts to change people, right? Where I think very often the kind of expectation is we're just going to lobby the Senate, we're going to lobby these people in power to do it for us. And I don't think that that's what abolition is. I think abolition is about demanding that we now, right, can determine collectively what an alternative society can look like.
That was beautifully said. I don't know what better way we can end your talk than that. But you were talking about people having negative or any kind of experience with the UC PD. And I will just share that when I was a student at UCSB and I was external vice president for local affairs, I had a situation with the UCPD where my office was vandalized and they didn't care at all. Like, and that was with me being EVPLA. Imagine like a student that, didn't have any kind of title at all, or maybe it was because I had a title, but I'm brown, so it didn't matter, no matter what title I had. Right. So I just want to say how important this work is. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Chua, for visiting us and sharing your important writings with us. And we will continue to work on this and be involved on May 1st, May 3rd, May 17th, and however long it takes to work on this very important issue. So can we all give her a round of applause?
Thank you so much for having me and engaging my work. It means a lot, and just such a treat to be able to come and talk to you all about abolition. I've left my non-UCSB email in the chat. If any of you are interested in becoming involved in Cops Off Campus, we've got a wonderful group. There's a lot of amazing undergrads who are leading the effort. So if you feel able to participate, we would most welcome you. Our meetings are every Friday at 11. And as we work up towards this May 17th event, it would be wonderful to have more people on board. So thank you all so much for offering your time and your care in thinking about this together, and hopefully see you all again soon. Bye.
Meeting. That was great. Really great. So I would love to give you all an hour to work on your organizing projects, and I have questions for you to answer. So this hour is time for you to explore your organizing project before you actually get right in the depths of it, so that ahead of time you can be thinking, number one, how you want to develop your organizing skills during this project. I'll say that again in case you didn't have your pen and pencil ready. How you want to develop your organizing skills during this project. Number two, what do you like to do? What brings you joy? And three, skills that you can share with organizations you are supporting. So, I mean, I technically don't have any control when you're not on Zoom. You could be starting your weekend, but I would prefer if you could dedicate this hour to answering those questions, because I think it will make a difference in the quality of your experience going into your organizing projects. Does that make sense? Okay.
Do we send these to you? Or
Yeah.
Oh.
If you could send them to me. And they don't have to be long answers, just whatever feels sufficient, right, for you.
If it's like for me, where I'm already a part of the organization, I'm just continuing the work, should I still answer the same questions, or
Yes.
I think I could. I just wanted to check.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the last question is, what skills can you share with organizations you are supporting?
I have a question, not about this, but about the email you sent for Dr. Fujino next week. Was that just like, if we have questions you wanted a response, or did you want everybody to respond to that email?
As many of you as can respond, just so I can give her feedback, because she kind of wants to come in and tailor her talk to what you want to know. So that's why those are there.
Okay, and we should just email you back with things that we're interested in.
Yeah, and then I'll be forwarding those to her.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time. And I'll just say that quote again: abolition is a horizon, not an event. So let's continue to think about what this looks like and enjoy your weekends.
Thank you.
Take care.